everybody, it's Emily at ARG Schooling, and I'm here today to talk about my favorite books of 2022. So I've been sitting here trying to film this all week, but I was sick and I just could not pull it together. I'm almost feeling normal today. We'll see how this goes. But I have a stack of books here that I have pulled together. So these are my top 10 favorites of 2022. No particular order. Let's start with middle grade. I have a nonfiction. I have I Will Protect You, a true story of twins who survived Auschwitz by Ava Moses Core. This is a middle grade memoir kind of a book, although it was written with Danica Davidson, and I thought this was just fantastic. So well done. This is a story about these twin sisters who were able to survive Auschwitz. Because they were twins, they were taken in by Dr. Mengele, who was obsessed with doing experiments on twins, and her will to survive was just so amazing. And the story talks a lot about her holding on to a lot of anger from what she experienced and learning to kind of let go of that anger and forgiveness and that kind of thing. And it was just so well done, so beautiful. It's such an important book that I just feel like every child should have to read this at some point in their education. The other middle grade that I thought was just phenomenal, I read a lot of really great middle grade this year, and probably my favorite of everything I read was Jennifer Chan Is Not Alone by Tay Keller. That book was just so good. And I don't even know how to talk about it beyond just telling everybody it's amazing and you should read it. This is a story about bullies and bullying, but it's so nuanced and so beautifully written, and it's very introspective and has a lot to say about bullying from both the perspective of the bullied, but also the person doing the bullying. And it's also about popularity and what does that mean, and making friends and keeping friends, and it's just so good. So well done. It's I keep saying it's what Mean Girls wanted to be if it wanted to be more smart and introspective and full of deep thoughts. It was phenomenal, and I think it's one of those books that everyone at any age could get something out of. So that was the middle grade. Do I have any other categories here? Maybe I'll do a YA. I did read a couple of YA, 3 YA that made it in my top 10 in no particular order. I have Gleanings by Neil Shusterman. I just loved going back to this world. I don't know. I will say forever that Arc of the Scythe is one of my top favorite trilogies of all time. And anytime I can get a chance to go back there and live in that world for a little bit, learn a little bit more about the world, I'm down for it. This book is short stories set at various time points in the Arc of the Scythe universe. So you're going back to the very beginning of the Scythedom and people becoming immortal. You're bouncing around. There's a story set after the events of the Toll. There are things happening during the stories. So it's really, really good. I had such a good time reading this. It was just the only thing that was missing for me. The only thing I would complain, I'm not really complaining, but I wish we could have gotten a Citra and Rowan story. Just let me see that they're still okay. I just want to know what happens to them next. That's all. That was my one quibble. But there's some really good stuff in here. You get a really amazing backstory for Goddard. You get a Curie story from the beginning of her being a Scythe. Just love. I read Anatomy, a Love Story by Dana Schwartz. I had been wanting to pick this up all year. I finally got it at the library 2 weeks ago and read it. And I'm gonna have to buy myself a copy because this was just so good. And I already pre-ordered the sequel that comes out in February, and I cannot wait to read that. But this is a story about a girl named Hazel who lives in early 1800s, I think like 1817-ish, in Scotland, and she wants to be a surgeon. And she's sort of unsupervised. Her father's away and not around much. Her mother is like preoccupied with protecting her son, who is now the heir because her older son has died. So like no one's really paying much attention to her and what she's doing. So she spends her time in her father's library studying medicine and trying her best to become a surgeon. And I just think I love stories like that. I love stories about girls who are like pushing the boundaries and trying to find a way to like do the man's job and like I love that anyway, but also how gruesome surgery and medicine was here. So we have a lot of like grave robbing, we have corpses galore, we have like so much gross stuff, but it's just like, I love her attitude. I love how she's just like so determined that no matter what, she's going to be a doctor, she's going to become a surgeon, she's going to figure out all these things that men can't seem to figure out, she's going to do all this stuff. There's also a whole plot line in here that I've kind of compared to Get Out, but not really, but it's similar to that. And like all these like strange corpses they keep finding and trying to solve the mystery of like what's going on with that. There's a little bit of romance. This is called a love story, and I was a little skeptical because I'm like, is this a romance? Am I getting myself into a romance story? Like, what's happening here? And it is a little bit a romance story. There is an element of that, but I think the love story aspect of this has more to do with her love for learning and medicine and like her desire to become a doctor. That's the love story here, really. Her and her books and her corpses. Like, I just thought this was great. And the other YA that I'm gonna put in my top 10 is I Must Betray You by Ruta Sepetys. This is one we read with the Arc Booked Book Club, and I think we all loved it. It was such a good story. This is about the Romanian Revolution in the 1980s, and we're following one teenage boy and his experiences through that. And this story is fascinating and harrowing and just like so well written. It's like really fast paced. I flew through it, and I'm dying to read everything Ruta Sepetys has written. At this point, I need more. And I just thought the story was just so good. Like, the concept of like everyone being like untrustworthy, and like even your parents, you might not even be able to like trust them enough to say something around them. Like, I just think what a wild time, and the story captures that so well, and I just thought it was fantastic. I'm trying to categorize everything. Another nonfiction I loved this year was John Green's The Anthropocene Reviewed. I listened to this on audio, which I highly recommend because it's narrated by John Green. So it's just like listening to him tell stories, and this book was just so beautiful. I love the way he talks about life and humanity and just so many random topics, but they all come together so well. And he reviews everything like on a 5-star. like I give this book 5 stars, but like also he gives Dr. Pepper 5 stars, and like he rates sunsets and like teddy bears. Like, it's really, like I said, kind of random, but just, it's beautiful. I recommend it. If you've never read anything by John Green, or if like me, you did not really like his fiction, give this a chance instead, because I think I resonated so much more with this than I do his fiction, which I've not enjoyed. This was just beautiful. I have one historical, like, I don't know what's going on here. I mean, I did have technically 2 other historical fictions here, but they were in the YA. But I only have one adult historical fiction, and I bet you guys can guess what it is. It's Beautiful Little Fools by Gillian Cantor. I don't know, this book was just, it hit all the right notes for me. I am a fan already of The Great Gatsby. That's one of my favorite like classical works of fiction. And so I was very excited now that it's in like the public domain. I wanted to see like what are we going to get from that? I'm sure great things. And I did read 2 Gatsby inspired books this year, but this one was my favorite by far. This is a story of the women in the story, and we're getting their perspectives, and it changes the whole thing. It flips the story in a way that I wasn't expecting, but now that I've read this, I will never look at Gatsby the same way again. And it's also a murder mystery, which I just thought the whole element of that, I expected it not to work, honestly, because I don't always enjoy murder mysteries and that sort of thing. And I'm like, we already know who murdered Gatsby, right? Like, it's not a mystery. But the way the author plays with the story here is so good. Like, if you haven't read this and you like Gatsby even a little bit, I recommend checking this out. Because even if you don't like Gatsby, I think you'll like this better. Because this just it's such good. I can't even articulate my thoughts here beyond saying that it's amazing. Like, this is exactly what I want when people retell a classic. Like, I want this kind of retelling. I have one horror that made it into my top 10, and really it was a tie between 2 books, but this is the one that I decided to go with, and that is Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. This is my very first Paul Tremblay, and I loved it. And I immediately needed to read more. And I read Cabin at the End of the World, which I was debating, these could both fit here, honestly. But because this was the first one I read, and I just fell head over heels for his writing, so it makes it into my top 10. This is a story about a family dealing with a supposed demonic possession, and they go about it in the worst possible way. They turn it into this reality show thing, and so we're getting the perspective of the youngest daughter in the family and her memory of this event and what happened and what she thinks happened. And it was so good. I'm not a fan of demonic possession stories. I'm not. I've only read a few that I actually liked. Usually this doesn't really work for me. But this did, and it surprised me because it's not what I was expecting it to be going in. And I loved the story of the sisters and their relationship and the family dynamic and what went wrong there. And I just thought the way this was done was just so engaging and interesting. I have 2 sci-fi now. Next, I'm going to talk about Bindi, the Bindi trilogy by Nnedi Okorafor. And this is actually a reread, but I don't know. I read the whole trilogy, I'm going to say 3 years ago-ish, when maybe when it first came out. And I read them all individually as they were published, I think. And I liked them a lot, and I found them interesting. But for some reason, and I want to say I gave them 3 or 4 stars at the time. It was good, but it didn't blow me away. For whatever reason, picking it up now, it was just reading it for the first time, but seeing it through different eyes or something. I don't even know what happened, but I just became obsessed. I want to read everything Nnedi Okorafor has ever written. I just think this story worked so much better for me now than it did the first time I read it. Has that ever happened to you? Where you just suddenly it's a different story. This is a book following a girl named Bindi who is part of this culture, and they don't leave planet Earth. They stay with their land. They're very almost sacredly connected to the land. They even wear it, the women coat themselves in it, and she has high aspirations and gets accepted into this university that is off planet, and she's the first of her people to ever leave the planet. And in doing so, she ends up meeting this violent race of alien and makes a connection. I don't know how to explain this. She makes a connection with them, and it's her story, and how she changes because of the connections she makes with different like alien species and stuff. This does something that I love in sci-fi and that I've discovered is like the thing that I want in a sci-fi story, where I'm gonna call it cozy sci-fi, but that's not quite right. But it's where it's happy sci-fi. It's meeting different alien species and learning to get along and finding those connections with them. I loved Long Way to a Small Angry Planet because of the way they went about this. I love Bindi because of the way it went about this. And I just think it's so fascinating, and I think it's what, if humanity could be its best, what it would be. If it were able to meet other species, I don't know. I just find it absolutely fascinating. And then my favorite book, my number one, and I'm going to say this is actually my favorite book of the year, and I bet, again, already you guys know what I'm about to pull up here, because I feel like I've talked about this book incessantly all year, and I've been like pushing it on people all year, and again, it does that thing in sci-fi that I just think is my favorite, and that is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I read this right at the beginning of the year for our book club, and like I expected to like it because I read The Martian and I really liked that, and I've been wanting to read something else by Andy Weir, so like I knew that it would be good. Did not know that it was going to be like my favorite thing I've ever read ever. Like, it's just so good. And again, highly recommend, if you're going to read this, get the audiobook. It's absolutely worth it. It's worth the subscription to Audible. It's worth it because the audio for this makes the story, honestly. I think if I read this with my eyeballs, it would have been good and I would have still loved it. But reading it and listening to the audio, the narration is so good. Like, it's so good. You have to listen to it. This is a story about a man who wakes up and finds himself in space on a spacecraft, and he does not know why he's there, cannot remember what's happening, and it's told in like these flashbacks of like him kind of, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing here, and oh no, and he has to save Earth. And I don't know even remotely how to explain this without like giving things away, so I'm not gonna do that, but Andy Weir is his best, I think, when he's writing these stories of isolation where like it's one man figuring everything out and like figuring out what he needs to do. There's a ton of science in here, like so much science. Like, again, one of his strong suits is like everything could really happen because he has worked out the science of this, and if you, like me, don't really understand that, it's actually not as like hard to read as you would think, especially listening to the audio. I kind of would zone out a little bit when he got into all the math of it and stuff, but it still like made enough sense that I could follow what was happening. But loved this so much. My favorite book of the year by far. Like, and I read a lot of really great books. So to say that I have one book that I can like, this is the standout, is pretty amazing, especially since I read it in January. Like, when does that happen? When do you start the year with an amazing book and like nothing competes? Nothing quite touches it? That I don't know that that's ever happened before. But there you have it. Those are my top 10 favorite books of the year. Right here. Oh, I'm gonna drop them. There we go. My top 10 favorite books of 2022. Let me know down below, what was your favorite read of the year? Were any of these books that you read, and did they make your top 10 this year? I'd love to know about it. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Happy reading. Bye.